It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Today on the Happy Families Podcast, Kylie and I are talking about a topic that has been big news recently. Should we ban social media for kids?
South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas says a ban would help young people improve their mental health.
The excessive use of social media within of itself is actually doing harm to our young people's mental health. And then we're seeing a dramatic spike in childhood depression, childhood anxiety at its most extreme end. We're seeing evidence of youth suicide. And I think we're sort of at the point now that governments have to act.
A couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we talked about the fact that the South Australian government are looking to make social media illegal for under 14-year-olds. My question to you, Justin, is can they actually do that? Can they ban it?
Yeah, so what they want to not only make it illegal for under 14s, but even make it so that you have to have parental permission for 14 and 15-year-olds to get hold of social media. And a lot of this momentum is as a result of the book that I'm currently reading, Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. Short answer to your question, can you ban social media? Yeah, of course you can. We ban all sorts of things. We ban driving for kids under a certain age. We ban alcohol for kids under a certain age. We ban all sorts of illicit substances for people of all ages. We ban gambling. So it's not a big deal really to put an age gate or an age restriction on whatever we want. It's entirely reasonable to do that.
You talk about putting an age gate on driving, for instance, or gambling or alcohol and drug use. Those, to me, seem a little bit easier to mandate because you've actually got to go to a shop front to, do that, or you're behind a wheel. It's very visual. Whereas social media, to me, is something that happens, kind of can happen anywhere and in the privacy of your own home. How do you go about banning something like that?
So in the early days with alcohol, with driving, with all the things that we're talking about, anybody could do it. I mean, when cars were first invented, there was no such thing as having a driver's license. You could put kids behind the wheel of a car. The genie is out of the bottle, the toothpaste out of the tube. Really hard to get it back in with something like social media because it is so pervasive. But even with alcohol, I mean, in the 1800s and even into the 1900s, it was not uncommon at all. In fact, it was pretty normal practice for kids to be given alcohol by their parents because it was cleaner and safer than the water that they were drinking often. I mean, kids are going to lie. People even today get around all the laws that we've just mentioned. But by legislating, what we do is we save pain and we reduce damage. That's almost guaranteed. The whole idea here is, it's like seatbelt laws. Everyone said, you can't make us compulsory. Like, it's silly to make people wear seatbelts. Nobody wears them. You're not going to be able to enforce it. Enforcement will be a big problem. I'm going to talk about that shortly. But ultimately, they made the laws. And what it did is it changed the norm. It changed the expectation. And overwhelmingly, people got in line with the law. That's the critical thing.
So I don't actually know when the seatbelt laws came in, but I have vivid memories of being a youngster and my mum and dad setting up the boot of the station wagon like a bed for me and my sisters
yes, that's right.
while we travelled.
Yeah.
The thought of it today is absolutely mortifying.
So just on that, I mean, you were born in the late 1970s. Front seatbelts in cars in Australia, 1969, compulsory, became legal then. And for seatbelts in the back seat, 1971. So that was the law in Australia. You're a New Zealander. In 1965, it became a legal requirement for all cars to have a front seatbelt. It wasn't until 1975 that you had to wear them. And by 1979, it was front and back. Okay. Anyone who grew up in that era knows that even though the legislation was there was a lot of flouting of the laws. A lot of people did not wear seatbelts, even into the 1980s. It took a while for the legislation to grab hold, but eventually it did. It reached critical mass and people bought into it. If South Australia works out a way to legislate, it's not going to be an overnight success. It's going to take a while for generations to move through, try new things, and figure out how to do it.
Do you know how they'll do it? Like, how will they go about this?
So there's a handful of states over in the US, Utah, Arkansas, they've both passed laws. I believe that Florida also has moved in that direction. Overt bans blocking kids under a certain age from being able to use any social media at all. And they're basically laws that mandate that platforms have to use age verification, age gating, before they'll allow access to the platform.
But isn't that just a question where it says, are you over 18, for instance, and you say yes?
Yeah, probably. I mean, we've got a couple of issues here. The ability for social media platforms to do this well is very, very limited. We know that from explicit content and how easy it is for kids to access that. A couple of things to consider. When it comes to even the usefulness of this sort of a law, we're making a law because there's a belief that mental health problems in our young people are happening due to the social media tidal wave that has ripped through the entire world over the last decade or so. If that is true, then this is really good, really important change. If it's not, then there's not going to be any improvement in mental health. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I mentioned it already, is enforcement. So I think that we should take a look at them one at a time. It's a really convoluted scientific issue. Do you remember hearing the story about how long it took for people to recognize that smoking causes lung cancer?
I don't think so.
So legitimately, it took decades. It took absolute decades. There were people who were screaming from the top of their carcinogenic lungs, smoking is killing me. Smoking is the reason that I have lung cancer. But it took decades for really high quality science to be done and to be accepted at a point where governments started to say, okay, we now have enough evidence that we can step in and say smoking is causing lung cancer. For a long time earlier, a long time prior to that, people were saying it was doing it, but they needed the evidence for it. And science is a slow process. It's really challenging. Same principle applies here when it comes to social media. If you have a look at Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which I said I'm reading at the moment, most of the studies that he's drawing on to provide this conclusion that social media is at the heart of our well-being woes, most of that science is based on underpowered and weak and poorly designed studies. And most of those studies, if not all of them, fail to reach what I would consider to be the appropriate standard to make the claims that Jonathan Haidt is making. Now, this is a concern. And there are people on the other side of the world, like Amy Orban and Andrew Shabolsky, who's at the Oxford Internet Institute, Oxford University, who have looked at the similar data and basically said, well, John Haidt and Jean Twenge, who is one of his collaborators, they're doing their stats wrong. They're not asking the right questions. They're asking the wrong questions of the numbers. And Andy Shabolsky and Amy Orban have literally and quite famously said the amount of social media you consume has the equivalent impact on your well-being as the number of potatoes you eat each week. I mean, it's a very, very provocative thing to say. I've got a different position. My position is this, and both Andy Shabolsky, I've spoken with him for hours at a conference last year, and Jean Twenge, who I've spoken with on the Happy Families podcast and in one of our summits, both of them reject my idea. So I don't know whether this is right or not because they're pushing back against it, but here's how I'm seeing it. I'm arguing that social media is not actually the issue, because loads of people use social media in really healthy and fun ways. I'm looking at you. You've just discovered Snapchat. You have just discovered Snapchat. And it's taken over your life. And it's brought you so much joy. But it's also built so many wonderful relationship moments. I mean, it's just been so funny. I want one word, filters. Filters. But you love Marco Polo and you love Messenger and you love Instagram and all those things. You use them in really productive and adaptive ways, healthy ways, usually, to build relationships in really meaningful and important ways. It's enhancing. It's elevating connection. It's what social media at its very best is supposed to do. The issue, of course, is that some people are totally feral. Some people, I don't know if I should say that on the podcast, but some people are feral. Like, I'm just saying it. Some people have addictive personalities. For me, social media is an unhappiness machine.
I've actually been talking to quite a few different people about the way they use social media. I choose to I don't engage with the comments. More times than not, I don't even comment myself.
Yeah.
I literally follow the people who uplift and bring joy and light into my life. And I'm interested in their content, not what everyone else's opinion is around their content. And it just makes such a difference.
So you're using it differently to me, though. I'm pretty much on there either for consumption or to share stuff. And then I get caught up in conversations with people who disagree with me because the mob, no matter what you say on social media, somebody will hate you for it.
Yeah.
And I can't help but get pulled into it. And it is, for me, this tremendous unhappiness machine. And for kids, especially kids who are struggling. We've got whistleblowers who have told us that there are bad actors. There's the intentionality of the algorithm, which is designed to grab attention and keep it. There's the privacy issues, the security concerns. Such a horrible list, just goes on and on and on. I can't use it and feel improved by it. It interferes with productivity, which is a predictor of well-being. It interferes with relationships, both in person and online. It interferes with sleep, physical activity. Long list. Overall, in spite of the way that you get the goodness out of it, it's not a net positive on the world. It's a really, really ugly reality for far too many, way too many people. So all of that is to say, research isn't giving us a clear answer yet, but experience is. And I think that the governments are right to be finally cracking down, even though the science isn't there yet. I guess time will tell.
So you've acknowledged that the research is limited and quite weak at this point. But the second issue you acknowledged was enforcement of it.
Yeah, how do you police it?
Yeah.
Yep. This is my big question. What's the government going to be able to do to enforce the law and hold the platforms accountable? See, you can tell whether somebody's wearing a seatbelt or not. You can tell whether there's a 15-year-old sitting in the park drinking a schooner or a long neck or not. But at the moment, X, formerly known as Twitter, I don't know how much longer we're going to have to keep on saying formerly known as Twitter. Everyone knows that X is formerly known as Twitter, but we still have to say it. X is completely ignoring the e-safety commissioner on a handful of things and challenging fines and other things in court, basically saying that the Australian government has no say on what happens on that platform. So the government is essentially weak. It's quite impotent here. It can't enforce so many laws that we already have. And if they do, it's really a lottery on whether or not you get caught. I don't see enforcement working, and kids will get around it if they want to, which means that the government's got good intentions here, I think, but I'm not sure that it's workable.
So based on everything you're saying, is change even possible?
Yeah, I don't know. I want it to be. I'm on the side of those who are saying, let's move the needle here. I'm not big on censorship. I think people should be able to do and say what they want, but I also am really big on developmentally appropriate opportunity. And our kids don't need this. It's not a developmentally appropriate system or platform. It's social media generally. It's just not appropriate for them. Here's what I know. Accountability is good. Accountability is essential. What the government wants to do is good. But to date, it's absolutely unquestionably lacking. And primarily that's because in Australia, we're quite helpless. The US Congress holds all the power here. The states, even in America, they're quite limited, but the US Congress, they have power. Here in Australia, we've got almost no power at all. What we know historically is that there's been 40 congressional hearings where tech titans have shown up and answered to Congress for the way they are or are not implementing safety measures and things that are supposed to keep our kids safe online. So far, after 40 hearings, there has not been a single law passed because of the fecklessness of politicians, the mendacity, the incredible dishonesty of the CEOs, in spite of the whistleblowers, in spite of all the suicides and all the deaths and all the tragedy, and the information that we have about how badly this is going. Something does need to happen. Change is necessary. Legislation will certainly help over time, but I don't think it's enough. And I don't think that it's really going to be what we need in the here and now.
Well, this is a really cool segue because I think you're about to start what you hope becomes a bit of a movement to change.
I am. And this podcast is not about that movement because the movement's coming up. We'll let people know about it. But this conversation does lean in that direction. So basically with my team and with some wonderful, wonderful colleagues from right around the country, a handful of people who have said, yes, we're with you on this. We're going to try and speak to as many primary schools and as many primary school parents across the country as we can. And we've got 4 key messages for an unplugged childhood, because I do believe, just like smoking, that eventually the social media science will catch up and point in the direction of harm being caused. So the 4 key messages for an unplugged childhood. Number 1, delay. Just delay. Commit, absolutely commit to keeping smartphones and social media out of primary school. I'm not worrying about high school. In some ways, it's a bit too late, right? Like that generation, it's too late. We've got to start somewhere. I think where we need to start is with our primary schoolers. We've got to get it right there. We can get critical mass in primary school. I don't think we can do it in high school right now. But if we can give our kids a play-based childhood because we've delayed and kept smartphones and social media out of primary school, we're already on track for a positive future. The second thing is boundaries. So when your kids get their first smartphone, they're probably going to agree to pretty much any conditions because they're really, really, really craving it. So we need to have rules around it. No phones in bedrooms, no phones in bathrooms, no phones overnight anywhere near you, tech-free zones, tech-free times. We should be allowed to check your phone sporadically because we're your parents and we care about you. I think also kids don't need smartphones. They need smart parents. And smart parents give their kids dumb phones. That's got to be the approach. Number 3, build a community. Kids don't want to be socially isolated. And if they're the ones doing it on their own, it's not fair to them, which is why we're in the situation we're in. But if we can, with everyone else in our parent group, in our class group, in our WhatsApp group, if we can build a community right now with other parents who all want to delay giving smartphones to their kids until at least the age of 14, and then we stick together because it takes a village, it makes it much easier for the kids. Like it's so vital. And last of all, go slow. Just slow it down. Have the conversations with your kids in primary school about how we don't want them. We don't want them on these social media platforms until they're at least 16. I think that should be our aim, maybe even older. Help them to know that they can navigate the world without it. Ultimately, we can wait for the government, but it's really costly. And I think as parents, we need to move on this way sooner. So watch out for that. The socials, the newsletter. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the Happy Families newsletter. More information coming up on that soon.
Well, it sounds like this is going to be something to look forward to.
Watch this space. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rule for Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. If you'd like more information about the stuff we've talked about, subscribe to the Happy Families newsletter. We'll let you know all about it as soon as we can. happyfamilies.com.au.